time and finish on time as well. Hi, everybody. My name is David Gitland. I'm on the public affairs team for the Interstate Bridge Replacement Program. And today we are going to provide an overview of the draft supplemental environmental impact statement process. So we appreciate you joining today. And we'll begin with a round of introductions and then get into our content. So Greg.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Greg Johnson. I'm the Interstate Bridge Replacement Program Administrator.
Hello, happy Saturday. My name is Chris Regan. I work with our environmental team on the Interstate Bridge Replacement Program.
Good afternoon. I'm Liz Anton, also with the environmental team on the Interstate Bridge Replacement Program.
Hello, my name is Haley Reff, and I'm with the Cultural Resources team on the Interstate Bridge Replacement Program.
And I am still David. And with that, we'll turn it to you, Greg.
All right, if we can go to the next slide, please. So first off, we'd like to welcome you and thank you for taking time out of on a Saturday, on a beautiful Saturday, by the way, to learn more about where we're at on this supplemental environmental impact statement process. But just to set some context, this project has been talked about for over a quarter of a century. But we are quickly coming to the point of where we're going to have a key document released. And so the purpose of this briefing is to get you oriented to that document, how you will eventually be able to interact and give comments, what the document contains. So this is a time for you to, after we make the presentation, to provide questions to us, and we'll answer any of your questions regarding the process and how you can interact with this. But this is a 5-mile corridor that spans both Oregon and Washington, and we are looking to replace a 107-year-old bridge and a 68-year-old bridge that are earthquake vulnerable. So this is key to the economy, not only of this region, but of the entire West Coast. So let's go to the next slide, please. So once again, this public briefing is to provide information about the draft supplemental environmental impact statement process and what can be found in the document, when it will be published this fall, and how the 60-day public comment period will work. And Haley Reff is going to introduce you to the Section 106 process and why this is important to the historic properties that lie in this program area and how to comment on its findings. And finally, once again, we're going to answer process questions regarding how you can interact with this document, what you can find in this document. So with that, I will turn it back over to David.
Thank you, Greg. And I have a couple of slides on how to use Zoom and YouTube. So we have closed captioning available for this briefing. If you are joining us on YouTube this afternoon, you can click the captioning button to access those captions. And if you're with Zoom, you can click the CC button to access closed captions in your control panel. Later in this session today, we'll have a question and answer session. You have the ability throughout this briefing to begin populating your questions now. We will answer them later, but if something sparks your interest, please do add a question to the Q&A, and we will go through those at the end of our briefing here. And you can use the Q&A box to ask those questions. And we will be happy to answer them later in the briefing. And we are focusing our Q&A session on process of the draft supplemental environmental impact statement. And we cannot speak to specific findings of the document just yet because it's not yet been published. And we will try to answer as many questions as we can during our time together today. And with that, Chris.
Thanks, David. And as Greg said, we really want to get in to talk about the specifics on commenting and what the Interstate Bridge Replacement Program's environmental document looks like. But in order to provide the context for that, I'm going to first talk a little bit about the National Environmental Policy Act as a law, and then also the history of the interstate of IBR. So next slide, please. So the National Environmental Policy Act was signed in 1970, and it was the first law that really mandated federal agencies implement planning in early phases of the work that they were doing to make decisions. So specifically, it required those federal agencies to assess and disclose environmental effects of proposed actions, and to also seek public comment to ensure that any decisions that were made first assessed those environmental effects, but then also considered public concerns and public input on that decision-making process. So the National Environmental Policy Act, the greatest focus within the National Environmental Policy Act was a documentation known as an environmental impact statement. Within the environmental impact statement, there are three focus areas for assessment. You look at specific elements of the environment, so that could be air, water, noise, ecosystem, including species, climate, etc. You could look at historic or cultural impacts, so historic properties or protected areas, archaeological resources, and through that, a lot of conversation, as you would expect, includes interaction and consultation with our tribes in the area. And then the third part was community impacts. So what are the residential, commercial displacement? How do you look at the business impacts and environmental justice? Next slide, please. But IBR isn't the first go at developing an environmental impact statement. We're actually building on past work. And so if you've heard conversations about the Interstate Bridge Replacement Program, you've heard us talk about supplemental analysis. And that's because the IBR continues the work of the Columbia River Crossing, which is a project that began in 2004. We started drafting environmental impact statement in 2004, and it led to a draft environmental impact statement that specifically evaluated a no-build alternative and 4 build alternatives. The draft EIS and the scoping process associated with that really created the foundation for assessing how it was that we were going to address the purpose and need of transportation within this specific corridor. We went through that process, issued the draft, received comments, addressed those comments, and in 2011, the FHWA, Federal Highways Administration, and Federal Transit Administration issued a record of decision that identified a specific selected alternative that was considered the locally preferred alternative. And then after that, with some specific response, there were 2 other revisions to that record of decision through reevaluations, the first one in 2012 and the second one in 2013. Unfortunately, the project was shelved in 2014 because there was a lack of regional consensus. And even though it was shelved, even though that draft the environmental impact statement and the record of decision remained on the books with Federal Highway Administration and Federal Transit Administration as the federal co-lead NEPA agencies. Those 2 co-leads then were requested to look at the proposal in front of the Interstate Bridge Replacement Program, and they remain the federal co-leads for NEPA on IBR. Next slide, please. And then in 2019, the governors of Oregon and Washington determined that this project was too important to remain on the shelf. And so they pulled it off the shelf and signed a memorandum of intent to restart efforts to replace the bridge on I-5 over the Columbia River. That effort also included attention from both Oregon and Washington's legislature, and the Bi-State Legislative Committee established, Oregon and Washington's legislative committees created a Bi-State Legislative Committee for oversight and guidance to help shape our work. The program continues to be guided through ODOT and WashDOT, Oregon Department of Transportation, and Washington Department of Transportation, partnering with federal, state, and local agencies, as well as tribes with interest within the program area. In addition to those partners, there are a number of local transportation partners that include transit, regional planning, the cities, and the ports within the immediate area. Next slide, please. And with that, I'll hand it over to Liz so she can talk a little bit more about IBR.
Thank you, Chris. I am going to talk a little bit more specifically first about the draft supplemental environmental impact statement. So you can go right to the next slide. So as Chris mentioned, the original compliance documents that were prepared for the Columbia River Crossing project under the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, were a draft environmental impact statement, a final environmental impact statement, followed by a record of decision. Even though the project was suspended in 2014, the transportation challenges that the Columbia River Crossing project intended to address still exist today. So we refer to those challenges or problems we're trying to solve as the needs of the program. And then the purpose is to solve those needs. So together, they're referred to as the purpose and need. And the purpose and need for the Columbia River Crossing project is the same as it is for the Interstate Bridge Replacement Program. Similarly, the range of alternatives that were evaluated in the Columbia River Crossing draft environmental impact statement remain valid as technical and economical solutions to addressing those issues or needs. So as Chris mentioned, the Columbia River Crossing draft environmental impact statement evaluated 4 build alternatives. And then in the final environmental impact statement, they narrowed that down to one build alternative, or the locally preferred alternative, or LPA. And that is what the record of decision was based on. So since the time when the Columbia River Crossing LPA was identified and the project was suspended until today, there have been changes, including in the physical environment, like new development has been constructed. There's been changes in community priorities. There have been different regulations that have come into effect since that time. So when the Interstate Bridge Replacement Program restarted this process, the federal lead agencies conducted another reevaluation in compliance with the National Environmental Policy Act to assess the extent of changes in conditions. Based on the reevaluation of that past work, it was determined that a supplemental environmental impact statement should be prepared so that we could identify and disclose any new adverse impacts and any new or changed mitigation associated with the changed conditions that had occurred since 2014. So you'll hear us talk about the Interstate Bridge Replacement Project's modified locally preferred alternative, or the modified LPA. So as we mentioned, the Columbia River Crossing project ended with a record of decision. That was a decision to advance the locally preferred alternative as the solution to move into final design and construction. When the Interstate Bridge Replacement Program restarted, we're using that CRC LPA as the starting point, or the baseline. We have updated or modified that LPA in response to the changed conditions that have occurred. So the updated CRC LPA is what we refer to as the modified locally preferred alternative, or modified LPA. I'll go into a little bit more detail of what the modified LPA is exactly in a couple of slides, but here you can see just a snapshot of the Interstate Bridge Replacement Program's corridor. So this is the main river crossing over the Columbia River, with Hayden Island on the lower half of the image and downtown Vancouver towards the top. When we move into preparing the supplemental environmental impact statement, we'll be preparing both a draft document and a final document. The draft document is what you'll be seeing later this fall. And then ultimately we'll prepare and publish a final supplemental environmental impact statement and an amended record of decision. But where we are right now is developing the draft supplemental environmental impact statement. So what you're seeing here on this slide is basically the table of contents of the draft supplemental environmental impact statement. So you can kind of get a sense of what the document will look like. And we'll talk a little bit more about the content of these chapters in a moment. But there will be a summary document, some introductory materials, or what we call the front matter, where you'll see an abstract and signatures by our lead agencies. Then we'll move into chapter 1, which is the purpose and need that we talked about, that really establishes why we're doing the project and what problems we're trying to solve. Chapter 2 is a description of the alternatives that we're evaluating. And then chapter 3 is really the bulk of the document, where for each community, environmental, or transportation discipline, we describe what are today's existing conditions and what would the consequences to the environment be if the project moved forward with the modified LPA, as well as considering a baseline or a no-build alternative. And then we also have chapter 4, which is compliance with another federal regulation, section 4F of the United States Department of Transportation Act. And this is kind of a specialized chapter that really focuses on historic properties and parks and other recreational facilities. And then we have a series of appendices or of supporting documentation. So chapter 1 is really a foundational chapter. It establishes the problems that the program needs to solve. So we have 6 problem statements or needs: safety of the highways, impaired freight movement, there's congestion on the highway, the bridge structures themselves, both over the Columbia River and the North Portland Harbor, so between the Portland mainland and Hayden Island, they're vulnerable to earthquakes. The bike and pedestrian paths are inadequate, so we're looking into improving those facilities. And then public transportation, we're looking at extending public transportation access across the river to support expanded public transit services, as well as a way to reduce congestion on the highway. So chapter 2 of the supplemental environmental impact statement is a description of the alternatives, like I mentioned. So chapter 1 established what needs to be fixed, and chapter 2 describes the different types of solutions to address those challenges or needs for the program. I'm going to explain some of the terms that we use, and you'll see in the draft supplemental environmental impact statement, or SEIS. In the SEIS, we're looking at 2 alternatives. One is the no-build alternative. That's the scenario where none of the components of the modified locally preferred alternative, including replacing the bridges and any of the other improvements along the 5-mile corridor, are constructed. So this is what we call the baseline. So what would happen if nothing is done? What happens to congestion, to safety, to seismic conditions? Then we compare that to what happens if we do make all of the improvements identified in the modified locally preferred alternative. So this is a set of multimodal improvements that address the purpose and need for the program. And then within the modified locally preferred alternative, we have some locations where we have design options to consider. These are slight design refinements for specific components of the modified LPA that will be evaluated in the document. So why is it important that we look at different alternatives and design options? Well, it provides us with a range of solutions so that we can compare, consider, and analyze different trade-offs. One option may impact one particular resource more while providing a benefit to another resource and vice versa. So it's important that we look at those different trade-offs so that decision makers can make an informed decision when we get to the final supplemental environmental impact statement and record of decision. We ensure the program remains compliant with federal regulations and also consider ways to maximize benefits while minimizing harm to the environment and the community. So here's an image of the program corridor and the components of the modified locally preferred alternative. It extends from the North Victory Boulevard interchange in Portland, north to the State Route 500 interchange in Vancouver, Washington. It's about 5 miles long and includes improvements to 7 interchanges along I-5. It includes a proposal to replace the bridges over the main channel of the Columbia River, as well as the bridge over North Portland Harbor. There is extension of public transit, including light rail service and express bus. And there are several active transportation improvements kind of shown in teal on this image to make the corridor more contiguous for those who walk, bike, or roll through this area. So this is kind of showing the same information, but just in text format. So as I mentioned, the modified LPA would replace the bridges over both the Columbia River and North Portland Harbor. So for the Columbia River bridges, we have 3 configuration options: a single level fixed span bridge. It'd actually be a pair of single level fixed span bridges, a pair of double deck fixed span bridges, and or a pair of single level movable span bridges. The modified LPA would improve active transportation facilities and connections. It would extend light rail transit. So this is talking about the yellow line, the max yellow line, extending that from the Expo station in Portland to a station near Evergreen Boulevard in Vancouver. And with that extension, there would be 3 new light rail stations, 1 on Hayden Island, 1 and 2 in Vancouver, 1 near the waterfront, and then that northern terminus near Evergreen Boulevard. And then for the 2 Vancouver stations, there would be park and rides. And so there's a few options for park and ride locations at those 2 Vancouver stations. There would be wider shoulders throughout the program area, both to improve safety and then also to accommodate express bus on shoulder transit service, and also emergency response vehicles so they can more easily navigate around congestion. The modified LPA would modify 7 interchanges on I-5, like I mentioned. Some of them, those improvements would be more minor, some would be more wholesale. We do have an option to either include the C Street ramps in downtown Vancouver or not include the C Street ramps in downtown Vancouver. And then I-5 itself, we're looking at retaining 3 through lanes in each direction with 1 auxiliary lane in each direction, and then also looking at an option that considers 2 auxiliary lanes in each direction across the bridge. And then we have another option where the I-5 alignment in downtown Vancouver could be shifted to the west a little bit between State Route 14 and Mill Plain Boulevard. So what is evaluated in the draft supplemental environmental impact statement? So we're evaluating the 2 alternatives, the no-build alternative and the modified locally preferred alternative. So what are we looking at in terms of how we're evaluating those 2 alternatives and the various design options? We first look at what's currently out there today, what currently exists in the program area. That's what's called the existing conditions. And then we look at our environmental consequences. That is what happens if the modified locally preferred alternative is constructed and is fully operational in the future. What would be the impacts to the natural and built or community environment in and around the program area? So why do we look at these different conditions and consequences? Well, it helps us understand what is here today and what could be here in the future. And it provides a way to compare the no-build alternative and the modified locally preferred alternative by looking at those benefits and impacts or trade-offs of doing nothing or making improvements. The way we evaluate impacts and benefits is by looking at it from a variety of perspectives. We look at long-term direct benefits and effects. So like after the improvements are constructed, what is it like for different viewers, for land use, for users of the infrastructure? What are those long-term changes that could be beneficial or impactful? We also look at short-term effects. These typically occur during the construction phase and are considered temporary in nature. There's also a National Environmental Policy Act requirement that has us look at what's called indirect effects. These are effects that do not occur as a direct result of the alternative, but occur farther away or further in the future. And then we also look at cumulative effects. This is when we look at the Interstate Bridge Replacement Program in combination with other past, present, and reasonably foreseeable planned future improvements that are going on in the area. For example, other development projects in Vancouver or on Hayden Island, we will evaluate the combined effects of the modified LPA with the effects of those projects. In cases where we have impacts to the community or environment, we go through a prioritization where first we look at avoiding those impacts. If we're not able to avoid them, we look at the design or other methods to try and minimize impacts. And in some cases, we'll be mitigating for adverse impacts. Sometimes those are required by best management practices or regulatory compliance with permits or approvals that the program will need to get, or they're very specific for the type of impact within the study area. So we are going to be doing this type of evaluation on about 23 or so different environmental disciplines. You can see we've grouped these into 3 categories: transportation-related benefits and impacts, community-related benefits and impacts, and kind of the natural environment-related benefits and impacts. And I'll go into each of these kind of buckets in more detail in a second. But when you see the public draft supplemental environmental impact statement, you'll see a very large chapter, chapter 3, which will have a section describing the existing conditions and then the benefits and impacts of the no build alternative and the modified locally preferred alternative for each of these bulleted disciplines. So first we'll talk about transportation. You can see it's not just transportation in terms of like cars on the highway. It's about freight use of the highway, local road systems. It's about public transit. We're looking at active transportation. That's the facilities for folks who walk, ride, or roll. Safety. And then we also look at river navigation for boats or vessels using the Columbia River. We look at aviation. And then much of our traffic and transit analysis actually feeds into our analysis of air quality, greenhouse gas emissions, and noise and vibration. So you'll have an opportunity to see the details of these analyses and the resulting benefits and impacts on those topics in the draft. Our next category is those disciplines that are related to the community. This includes cultural resources, economics, electric and magnetic fields, environmental justice, equity, hazardous materials sites, land use, neighborhoods, parks and recreation, property acquisition, public services, utilities. So these are considered in terms of how the modified locally preferred alternative fits into the built environment. And those impacts could be direct, long-term, short-term, or temporary during construction. And then finally, the third category is the natural environment. So this is where you'll see our analysis for climate change, ecosystems, geology, and groundwater, the visual quality, water quality and hydrology, and wetlands and waters. So this is how the modified locally preferred alternative interacts with the natural landscape. The analysis is guided through very science-based methods where we've really done a fair amount of field work to understand what's out there today, our existing conditions, and how it would be affected by the modified locally preferred alternative. It evaluates impacts to habitats, wildlife, and natural resources like water, vegetation. So I think that brings us to the end of the overview of the types of analyses and the subject matter or different environmental disciplines that you'll find in the draft SEIS. And now I'll pass it back to Greg to talk a little bit about our public comment process.
Thank you, Liz. If we can go to the next slide. So one of the most critical parts of a large complex program like this is getting public comment, getting public input. So we are going to be looking to make sure that everyone who wants to comment, who wants to have their opinion heard on this, has an opportunity to do it. So we're going to talk about how you can participate. So once again, the draft supplemental document will be coming out early this fall, hopefully before the end of September. And there are several ways that you can comment. So we will have a web-based form that you can fill out. You can also email comments to our email address, and all of those contacts will be shown at the end of the presentation. You can send a comment through regular mail. We do accept regular mail. We also we have where you can call into our office and leave a verbal comment, which we will transcribe and make sure that it is captured as part of the public record. And finally, you can comment at public hearings. So we're going to have 2 public hearings, one on the Vancouver side, one on the Portland side. And all of those hearings will be transcribed and capture word for word every comment that is made, every question that is asked. But we will also provide various ways to interact as the publication date approaches. We will continue to be out in the community. We are at tabling events this weekend. We will continue to make sure that folks know about where this program is and the complexities of it and how to interact with us. So the document itself will be made easily available and accessible to all community members. So we will follow ADA standards. The document itself will have an online search function. So if you're only interested in certain parts of the document, you won't have to comb through the entire thing to get to the area that interests you. So there'll be a search function. You put in a term, and it will show you where that term shows up in the document. And also, the summary of the document will be interpreted into multiple languages. Our program has committed to equitable outreach and reaching into parts of the community that generally does not participate in programs like this, whether it's because of language barriers or other barriers. So we are trying to break those down and make sure that folks who have English as a second language can participate and understand the text that we will be presenting. So with that, I'll go to Chris Regan.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. And with all these opportunities or ways to comment, we really want to make sure that your comments are received in the most constructive way, so that IBR can take those comments and do what you want us to do with those. And so we've got some tips we wanted to provide to you. So the constructive comments provide feedback to our program that helps us do some specific things, helps us refine design options, update analysis, or informs our final supplemental environmental impact statement. When you write comments, those comments should pertain to specific information that you've pulled out of the draft or gaps in information that you believe should be in the draft. So it could include, for example, a request for more information because you don't feel that all of the information is where it should be within the draft supplemental. And when you share those a specific opinion, for example, you might want to do so in a way that shows how you've tied that opinion to specific design options or analysis. So show what you've learned in the draft supplemental that helped form the specific opinion, and then provide the opinion that you want the IBR program to understand and to help address. The other thing that's pretty important is when you provide a comment, that comment should stand alone and not necessarily include any attachments or hyperlinks or to outside information. But if you do bring up information that's relevant, that you can cite, citing that information within your comment is always a good idea. Next slide, please.
So let's talk about what the next steps are. So let's go to the next slide, please. So once again, the responses to the comments that we received during this public comment period will be published in the final SEIS. And this will more than likely be a lengthy process of gathering all of the comments and providing responses to them. So we anticipate that this final supplemental document will come out sometime late next summer, early fall of 2025. So the public comments will be used to update our technical analysis, refine design options, and inform future designs. So that's why what Chris spoke to in the previous slide, making constructive comments. Comments such as "we don't like this project" don't really have a qualitative impact to what we're doing. But if you tell us why you don't like it, we can respond to it and hopefully take that into account as we are doing our designs. So design of the proposed improvements, including the selection of a specific design options and mitigations, will be further refined based on the findings and public input. And these will be documented in the final supplemental environmental impact statement and the amended record of decision. And once again, that final supplemental environmental impact statement and amended record of decision are anticipated in late 2025. And soon after we receive that record of decision, we plan to go into construction still in late 2025. So this is going to be a very, very busy time period as we are transforming from the NEPA process into construction. So your input is very much desired. So I think if we go to the next slide, then we'll bring up Haley.
Thanks so much, Greg. Good afternoon, everyone, again. I'm looking forward to sharing a few details with you about our Section 106 process and upcoming public comment opportunity. Slide, please. Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966 is a process that all federal agencies must follow to consider effects on historic properties from projects like IBR. This is a separate law from NEPA that IBR must comply with, and similar to NEPA, Federal Highway Administration and Federal Transit Administration are also co-leading this process. So Section 106 establishes a process for evaluating effects that are within the determined area of potential effect, or APE. This fall, documents to identify historic properties called determinations of eligibility and assess effects to historic properties called findings of effect will be shared for public comment. Section 106 relates specifically to historic properties and cultural resources, which includes any pre-contact or historic district, site, building, structure, or object, such as artifacts, records, and remains. The Section 106 comment period will run separately yet parallel to the draft SEIS public comment period. The Section 106 public comment period lasts 30 days and will begin in fall of 2024. So Section 106 is procedural and is comprised of 4 key steps. In step 1, the lead agency or agencies, in this case Federal Highway and FTA, initiate the process. This includes determining the undertaking, coordinating with other reviews, identifying the relevant consulting parties, and planning to involve the public. Step 2 is the identification of historic properties. This includes determining the area of potential effect, or APE, preliminary survey work to identify historic properties, determination of eligibility, and of course, all in consultation with the Section 106 consulting parties and the public. In step 3, we then assess the potential effects of the program on the historic properties that were identified in step 2, again, in consultation with consulting parties and the public. And this is where we currently are in our Section 106 process for IBR. And then finally, in step 4, we resolve the adverse effects that were identified in the previous step by developing and considering alternatives or modifications to avoid, minimize, or mitigate the adverse effects. For the IBR program, these resolutions will be documented in a programmatic agreement, or PA. As described in step 2 of the Section 106 process, the area of potential effect, or APE, was determined in 2023 and is located in portions of both Washington and Oregon, reflecting program components and design options under consideration. It is within this area of potential effect that historic properties have been identified and program effects have been analyzed as laid out in steps 2 and 3 of the Section 106 process. The identification of historic properties in step 2 of the Section 106 process has been conducted and will be presented in the Section 106 Determinations of Eligibility, or DOE, for public comment. There is one DOE document for each above-ground historic resource identified that was considered potentially eligible for listing in the National Register of Historic Places, and why. The assessment of effects laid out in step 3 of the Section 106 process has been conducted and will be presented in the Section 106 Findings of Effect, or FOEs, for public comment. There is one document for each historic property that was determined eligible for listing in the National Register of Historic Places. Within those documents, you will note an analysis that includes possible effects findings, which are an adverse effect, which is determined when a program activity may alter the characteristics of an historic property that will make it significant. A no adverse effect, which is determined when a program activity will have an effect on an historic property, but will not alter the characteristics that make it significant. And no effect, which is determined when program activities will have no effect to an historic property. For both the identification process and the effects analysis process, consultation with Section 106 consulting parties has occurred prior to finalizing determinations. Additionally, all documents have been concurred with by the Oregon State Historic Preservation Office or the Washington Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation, respective to the state in which the property is located. So this fall, there will be a Cultural Resources online open house to share details of the determinations of eligibility and findings of effect with the public and to gather your input. From there, we will consider mitigation strategies for known adverse effects. And then next, as part of step 4, we will generate a draft of a project level programmatic agreement to include roles and responsibilities of the agency and the consulting parties, agreed upon measures to resolve adverse effects, processes for the phased identification and evaluation of historic properties, and protocols for involving stakeholders in consultation as effects are identified and resolved. Finally, we'll consult with the public regarding the draft of the programmatic agreement, which, as I just mentioned, will include measures for mitigation of known adverse effects to Section 106 properties. That consultation is anticipated in early 2025. For your next immediate steps on how to participate in our outreach this fall, the Section 106 comment period will commence approximately 30 days after the beginning of the draft SEIS public comment period. Participation can occur via the online open house, and comments can be shared via web-based form, email, or mail. Additional notifications will be sent out to notify the public when the Section 106 comment period begins. To close out the Section 106 portion of this presentation, I would like to share a few resource links in case you are interested in learning more about the Section 106 process. Thank you, and we look forward to hearing from you. Over to you, David.
Excellent. Thank you, Haley. And it is now time to begin our question and answer process. Again, on the screen are instructions on how to participate in the Q&A, and we already have some questions in the queue, so I'm glad that people have been able to find that functionality. One note again is that we cannot speak to questions about specific findings, but we can talk about process. And if we run out of time before we get to your question, you're welcome to follow up with us and get an answer via email or visit us during office hours. And that information is available on the program website at interstatebridge.org. Okay, so with that, we will begin answering questions. The first question submitted was, how can I join an advisory group for this project? That is a great question. And I would recommend that you email info@interstatebridge.org. And that would be, and you can share your interest in joining an advisory group, and someone can follow up with you with potential opportunities.
And David, if I can add, we have 3 advisory groups that have community members on them. So the Equity Advisory Group, the Community Advisory Group, and the Community Benefits Advisory Group. So yes, write us if you have an interest. We do have some turnover at times, and we keep a rolling list of folks who are interested in participating on the advisory groups.
Great, thank you, Greg. Next question. Will the IBR draft SEIS provide more bridge approach graphics or animation that show the impacts on Vancouver and Hayden Island? Chris or Liz, would you like to take this question?
Sure, I'll jump in. Thank you for the question. The goal of the draft supplemental and the work of the program is to ensure that you understand the specifics about the work that we plan to do within the program and the environmental effects of that work. And so you will see a lot more information specific to the approach. And we will also have a number of meetings where we'll be able to, provide updates, go into details, and then also have conversation with you. So if you would like to get into more details about anything in particular, we're there to help do that, so that hopefully it'll help inform the kind of comment that you want to provide to the program.
Thank you, Chris. Okay, this next question I'm going to highlight is one of those data questions that I don't think we're able to answer at this time. The question is about the amount of daily trucks through downtown Portland and Vancouver. And I think the recommendation there is to wait for the document to be published, and we will have details related to that. Liz, is there anything you'd like to add to that response?
Nope, I think you covered it, David.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the next question. I may want to take photos of resources I suspect could be impacted. How would I submit those with my comment? Liz, would you like to answer that?
Sure, yeah, you can do it in a number of ways. You can put them in the body of your email if you're emailing your comment. If you are sending snail mail, you can include them that way. Those would probably be your best options.
Thank you, Liz.
And David, if I could add to that. So in one of my slides, I said, don't have an attachment or a link to a different site. So, in this case, a picture is actually helping to provide the context and define something that you're talking about specific to that area. So it's a little different than saying, I read in this report, or see somebody else's description of the issue that I'm trying to get to. So it would be considered part of the body of that email. And again, good context for us to consider.
Great, thank you, Chris. Okay, next question. If we're working with a community that may not feel comfortable or able to attend a public hearing, could we capture their comments on video? How would we submit that?
There's a lot of ways that you can submit comments. You can call the phone number and leave a voicemail, where you will also have virtual public hearings that you can attend to leave your comments. Those would probably be my suggestions for people who aren't comfortable or able to attend a public hearing, would be to leave a voicemail or attend the virtual public hearing.
Great. Thank you, Liz. And I'll just reiterate what Greg said, which is to stay tuned for more details about those public comment opportunities. We'll certainly share them via our website and other methods. Okay, next question is for you, Greg. I-205 is one of the nation's most accident-prone bridges. IBR's bridge will be steeper with sharper curves with the same rain and ice. How can it be safe?
So we are designing this bridge and this entire corridor to federal standards. We will not exceed federal standards. We're very well aware of the weather conditions that occur and the climatological changes that are occurring in this area. So we understand that, and those will be taken into account in any design. It will be safer. It will be much safer than the existing bridge, which currently has grades that exceed 5%. So this is important. We have a number of engineering professionals who are working on this, and they will be making sure that this bridge and this entire corridor is safe.
Great, thank you, Greg. Okay, the next question is currently the only open question in our queue. So if you have additional questions, please do feel free to write them into the Q&A box. So Chris and Greg, looking to you for this. Are you considering using stronger, less expensive, much lower carbon geopolymer cements that might last millennia? Or are we stuck with OPC that might last 60 or 100 years? It's already 8% of climate change and the global use, which will quadruple in the next 25 years.
And I was going to start that, and then great to have a little bit more of the specifics here. But I'm going to quote you, Greg. So our program administrator, Greg Johnson, made a commitment that we would deliver the program through a climate and an equity lens. And that climate lens includes what IBR program has referred to as a framework. And the framework includes what can we do in IBR with design? What can we do with construction? How do we look at resilience? And then what are the specifics about operations of the bridge that help us address climate change concerns? And so as we start looking into those different areas, we will be looking for the best possible options ahead of us. But when we do that, part of what we're looking at includes availability of resources. And so we're already starting to scour consideration of fuels and of supplies, and deciding how best can we approach to make the best effort to reduce our impacts to climate. And again, that's just the framework there. Greg, I don't know if you had anything else you wanted to add to that discussion.
Yeah, more specifically towards some of the materials that we'll be seeking to incorporate into the project. Concrete is going to be one of the major components of this work. So we had a meeting just within the last month with the Concrete Ready Mix Association and the cement producers to talk about what is the greenest and the cleanest material technology that is out there. So we're going to be scouring. We're going to be asking our contractors to be taking a look at what materials will lower our carbon footprint, but also give us a long life for this bridge. Currently, the thought on bridges of this size and magnitude is you design them for 100-year lifespans, and you maintain them to hopefully keep them moving and in operation for a longer period than even that. So we'll be looking at long life materials to incorporate, and also trying to balance that with the costliness and where those materials come from. Because if, as Chris alluded to, if we are having to truck materials from around the country, we're also adding to the carbon footprint of that material. So we're one of the few programs that I know of in the country that has a dedicated climate officer who is looking deeply into how we can make this program as green as possible.
Great. Thank you, Greg. Next question. When does IBR expect a bridge permit decision from the Coast Guard? Chris, would you like to answer that?
Sure, I'll take a stab. I was trying to get the specific information and I wasn't fast enough. But we continue to have conversations with our regulatory agencies on a weekly, if you know, weekly basis, no longer than monthly conversations. Right now, we are scheduling getting a bridge permit in late 2026. But there's a lot of steps that it takes to get to that point. So we are working again to identify the impacts, to coordinate with the Coast Guard regarding their perspective on those, and then we will be submitting a bridge permit application late 2025 or early 2026 with the hopes of getting it so that we can get to construction in 2027 of the bridge specifically.
Thank you, Chris. At this time, there are no questions in the queue. I take that back. 2 just showed up. Okay, Greg, this first one might be for you. There's a mention of a tunnel, and I'm reading it in real time. Okay, this might be a question for Greg, Chris, and Liz because it touches on design and the public process. So here's the question. It would appear that a decision has been made to proceed with a replacement bridge as opposed to a tunnel or a third bridge across the Columbia. How is this the locally approved plan when those of us significantly affected on Hayden Island believe this to be a horrible option with substantial negative local effects? Who was this locally approved by? And wouldn't the public comment period have been more meaningful before going this far with a specific design?
So I can jump in with an overview on the tunnel and the third bridge question. First off, this is the Interstate 5, which once again is the only interstate that runs along the West Coast connecting Mexico and Canada. So this is the facility that freight and most users choose to use as they are traversing on the West Coast. So a third bridge is an issue that this region needs to grapple with, but that third bridge question will never come to the forefront until the I-5 issue is settled. We're not going to relocate I-5, so I-5 has to be viable going into the future. So the third bridge issue is something that we'll have to wait to see if the improvements we make here improve the overall crossing profile throughout the Portland-Vancouver frontier. So on the issue of a tunnel, a tunnel was examined in the Columbia River Crossing project. That was a bored tunnel was looked at. During the IBR, we looked at an immersed tube tunnel. And one of the issues that we found with both tunnel scenarios is that you cannot hit the interchanges that are major interchanges for this project. For instance, the SR14 interchange could not be connected to with a tunnel. You would have to take traffic out of direction and impact Fort Vancouver in a major unacceptable way with a tunnel. A tunnel at the shore of the Washington shoreline with the Columbia River would be over 50 feet deep. And so that just the construction envelope would be an entire city block wide. You would not be able to maintain traffic. And on our website, you will find we did a presentation on the 10 reasons why a tunnel doesn't work at this location. It's not that we love bridges and hate tunnels. A tunnel just doesn't work at this location. So I'll ask the other folks to weigh in on some of the other NEPA implications that were in the question.
Yeah. Thanks, Greg. I'll provide the technocrat answer as well. So the part of the discussion earlier in the presentation included the path that our NEPA document took to get us to where we are now. And that was the supplemental analysis that we're doing is based on the work that occurred under the Columbia River crossing. And so through the Columbia River crossing, we did the alternative analysis and looked at what were the alternatives that would meet the purpose and need of this project or of a bridge replacement. As Liz jumped into a little bit more detail, as IBR began, the federal government picked up the Columbia River crossing, did a reevaluation, decided that the purpose and need remained valid, and determined that a supplement to the previous NEPA document was the right course of action to move forward with the program. And so a lot of the work that was done during CRC, which included landing on, it's a technical term for the Federal Transit Administration, a locally preferred alternative, remained valid and needed to be updated as we moved into the Interstate Bridge Replacement Program. And so that's why we talk about a modified locally preferred alternative and a supplemental environmental impact statement, and that we're not going through a separate alternative analysis. We are picking up the alternative analysis, looking at those things that have changed within the program area, and updating our environmental document to ensure that the environmental impacts of those things that have changed are analyzed as we move forward with the draft supplemental environmental impact statement.
Thank you, Chris. This next question, I think, is one half process, one half data. So Liz, maybe this is one for you. Will the draft SEIS analyze higher traffic patterns due to induced demand resulting from bridges that are so much wider? And there's a follow-up about the emissions from vehicle flow outweighing anything we might do to mitigate effects during construction.
Thanks, David. So the draft supplemental environmental impact statement will analyze the effects of the modified LPA on the transportation system as it's designed in the modified LPA. Regarding whether or not the emissions would be increased or not will be documented in the draft SEIS.
So David, if I can also weigh in on this issue, as transportation professionals, we recognize the phenomenon of induced demand. And there are certain circumstances that do drive induced demand. This corridor is over 100 years old. The land use along this corridor has been in place and is continued to be reinforced by the metropolitan planning organizations. The bridge itself does not induce traffic. Land use induces traffic. So we take the models that are given to us by the metropolitan planning organizations and take that into consideration as we are doing our analysis. Okay.
Thank you, Greg. This next question has some technical details in it. So I'll read it. Haley, this might be something that sounds similar to a question that you answered last time. The question is, you will also use hundreds of tons of steel on this bridge, and steel is 9% of climate change that may quadruple by 2050. Does the IBR program know about Boston Metal, which should have electro smelters that make expensive carbon-free steel available by 2060? They say that they can get stainless right out of the smelter, no energy-intensive second and third melts needed. Stainless rebar might also help your bridge last millennia, not a century. Are you considering this? And quick clarification, inexpensive carbon-free steel. Thank you for that.
So David, I can jump in on this
Thanks,
one.
Greg.
Once again, our principal climate officer is looking at the materials that we're going to need to incorporate into this project and trying to determine what are going to be the greenest, less carbon footprint materials that we can use that still give us the lifespan, the expected lifespan of this overall project. So we are looking at stainless steel rebar. That's been a common use in investments on bridges of this size to give that additional life. There are other low carbon footprint materials that also can supplement rebar, but we will be looking in every corner of not only the United States, but the world for the right technology that gives us the balance of lifespan, life cycle, as well as low carbon, as well as cost efficient. Because we can design something that no one could afford, and it could be the greenest thing, but no one could afford to build it. So all of those things have to come into balance.
Thanks, Greg. The next question is about our principal climate officer and the ability to communicate with them directly. As a program, the IBR program offers office hours, both in person and virtual. So I would recommend going to our program website and looking for the office hour information. And if you put in your details and select a time and mention that you would like to have this conversation, we can put you in touch with the right technical experts to have that discussion. Okay, the next question. The Columbia riverbed is largely sand. Liquefaction is a strong possibility with a large earthquake. How would any bridge withstand this?
So, David, I'll jump in on this and ask some of our other folks if they can add to it. So we have done geotechnical investigations. The last program, the Columbia River Crossing, actually did several shafts bored down to a soil foundation that will support this bridge. So we know that we have to have something that will withstand a large magnitude earthquake. So all of those things are being taken into account, and we will be putting in what are called drill shafts, very similar to what's happening on the Abernathy Bridge, that take these concrete filled shafts all the way down to bedrock to provide that support for an earthquake. Currently, the existing piles are wood piles. Those were the tallest trees they could find at the time. They cut them off, shaved off the branches, drove them into the soil, and that's what the current bridge is sitting on. We understand that that is not something that will sustain in a large earthquake. So we're looking to the most modern geotechnical designs and earthquake resistant designs to build this bridge with.
Thanks, Greg. Okay. Again, at this moment, we have no open questions. I'm going to take the opportunity to share my screen. Okay. And so what you're looking at here is a thank you slide. But what I wanted to highlight was you could see how to contact us, our email address at the bottom of the page, info@interstatebridge.org, and also our website address in the bottom right of the page, www.interstatebridge.org. And we do have some initial draft SEIS information, much of what Liz has shared today available, and you can see the website to access that on our screen right now. Greg, if we don't receive any additional questions, we may be able to wrap just a little bit early. Do you have any closing remarks you'd like to share as we create some space for those additional questions?
Well, I'd just like to thank folks for these have been very, very good questions. And I'd like to thank folks for taking time out of their Saturday to participate. Once again, having the public be aware and participating makes a stronger project. So we appreciate you coming on, and we hope to hear from you as we go into the draft supplemental process. And please, if you do have further questions that are not processed but more detail oriented, set up office hours. That's what our office hours are meant to do. So you can get on our website and set those up, as David outlined.
Okay, I'm not seeing any additional questions, so I'm going to say that we are going to end. Oh, one question just popped up, the email and phone number we should use for comments. Liz, I'll jump in here and just mention that that information will be published when we share more information about how to participate during the comment process. So more details to come on that. But
David, if you could encourage folks to follow our website, and we have a newsletter that comes out monthly. That is the best source of information to follow the program and stay updated on other ways to contact us. So.
Okay, with no open questions, we will end just a little bit early. Thank you, everybody, again. Just echoing Greg's thanks, and thank you to our interpretation team. Please enjoy the rest of your Saturday.